It began like any other day in the courthouse. Another docket, another case, another defendant walking in through doors that rarely opened for justice and often closed behind judgment. The pews creaked under the weight of impatience and assumptions. The air smelled of old varnish and fresh indifference. But what no one in the room knew, not the clerks, not the bailiff, and certainly not the judge, was that this day was going to be different. Because the man standing trial that morning wasn't just another forgotten name on a case file. He was more than what the court could see. His truth didn't fit neatly into their boxes. It carried the kind of weight that doesn't make noise until it lands. He walked in slow but firm, his steps heavy with decades. His name was Luther Grant, 78 years old, a retired architect and Vietnam veteran. On paper, he was just another old man accused of trespassing on condemned city property. But in spirit, he was so much more than that. Luther wore a brown flannel shirt buttoned to the collar, khaki slacks that had known years of use, and leather boots whose soles had met both war-torn mud and church aisles. He removed his worn cap as he stepped into the courtroom. Respect, even if it wasn't returned. His eyes scanned the room without searching. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He wasn't hoping for leniency. He was just here to tell the truth, whether they were ready or not. On the bench sat Judge Raymond Caldwell, 62 years old, thick-jawed, gray-haired, and known for his no-nonsense, high-conviction record. The kind of judge who thought mercy was weakness and nuance a waste of time. To him, every case was a straight line. Every defendant a variable in a formula he'd memorized decades ago. And Luther? Luther was just another reminder of a system Caldwell thought he had mastered. The judge didn't even look up when the bailiff called the next case. Case 889C. The State of Georgia versus Luther Grant. Charged with unlawful occupation of condemned property. Luther stood alone at the defense table. No attorney. No family. No crowd cheering him on. Just a man, and the weight of history pressing against his spine. Caldwell finally raised his eyes. And when he did, his expression barely shifted. Just another day. Another man who had stepped where he didn't belong. You again, the judge muttered, flipping through the file. Mr. Grant, you were found trespassing at 249 Halston Avenue. That property's been condemned for over 2 years. Care to explain what you were doing there? Luther's voice was low but unwavering. I was sitting on the porch. A few quiet chuckles drifted from the back of the gallery. The porch, Caldwell repeated, leaning back. Of a condemned house you do not own. It used to be mine, Luther said simply. The judge sighed and shook his head. I see. Another one of those stories. There it was. The dismissal. The subtle disdain that disguised itself as disinterest. But Luther didn't flinch. He'd seen worse. Much worse. You people always have a story, Caldwell continued. But nostalgia is not a legal defense. I didn't come here to defend a memory, Luther said. I came because you asked where I was, and I answered. The prosecutor, a young woman in a neatly pressed navy suit, rose to speak. Her voice was firm, practiced. Your Honor, this is not Mr. Grant's first incident. He was cited 6 months ago for entering another restricted zone during a redevelopment initiative. There was no violence, but there's a repeated pattern of unlawful presence. Thank you, Ms. Kinley, Caldwell replied. And I suppose the state is recommending jail time this round? Community service or a fine, Your Honor, she said carefully, given the nonviolent nature and the defendant's age. Which only means he's had more time to learn better, Caldwell snapped. But here he is, sitting on porches like he still owns them. The judge turned back to Luther. So what is it this time? Sentiment? Resistance? Some poetic attempt at protest? Luther looked him in the eye. When I sit there, it's the only place that still feels like mine. That silence returned. Not empty. Not uncertain. But full. Heavy. Caldwell frowned. Well, Mr. Grant, feelings aren't law. I sentence you to 30 days in county jail. Effective immediately. There was a shift in the room. The prosecutor blinked. Even the bailiff paused, glancing at the judge for confirmation. But Luther? He simply nodded. Yes, Your Honor. No protest. No gasp. Just certainty. Before the bailiff could approach, Luther raised his hand calmly. One request, he said. A phone call. Caldwell rolled his eyes. You had your chance to call a lawyer. Not a lawyer, Luther replied. Just one call. The judge waved dismissively. Fine. Bailiff, give him your phone. 60 seconds. The room watched as Luther dialed a number from memory. No contact list. No hesitation. He lifted the phone to his ear and spoke 4 words. It's time. Bring them. He handed the phone back, then stood tall again. The judge raised an eyebrow. Bring who, Mr. Grant? But Luther didn't answer. And that's when it began. The sound of high heels echoed sharply against the marble floor outside the courtroom. 3 loud clicks. Then silence. Then the heavy courtroom doors opened with force. A tall woman entered, black suit, white blouse, heels sharp enough to cut concrete. Her presence didn't ask for attention. It took it. Her name was Delilah Grant, Luther's daughter. U.S. Congresswoman. Former federal prosecutor. One of the most powerful legal minds in the southeastern United States. Behind her came 3 men in tailored suits carrying thick briefcases. Attorneys from Hartwell, Dawson, and Lee, the firm known for winning the unwinnable. And they weren't here to plead. They were here to rectify. Delilah walked straight to the bench. Your Honor, she began. Before you move to remand my father, there are documents you must review. Coldwell scowled. This case has already been ruled on. She placed a heavy folder on the bench. Not with all the facts. He hesitated, but the weight of the room had shifted. He opened the folder and froze. Inside were property deeds, land surveys, court-certified letters, and zoning maps. The house in question had never been legally condemned. The process had begun but was never finalized. The property was still partially owned by Luther Grant through a trust established by his late wife. Coldwell scanned the pages faster now, searching for anything, that could prove what he'd just done was defensible. It wasn't. He looked up slowly. This wasn't provided in the original filing. It was public record, Delilah said. You just didn't look. Luther hadn't moved. He hadn't smiled. He just waited. Coldwell tried to find footing. Had I known it. You didn't ask, Delilah interrupted. You assumed. Coldwell's voice cracked slightly. I moved to vacate the sentence, he said quickly, turning to the clerk. Strike all charges from the record. Immediate release. The bailiff stepped away from Luther, visibly relieved. The gallery buzzed with whispers now. Reporters were scribbling. Phones lit up with messages. The headline was already writing itself. Judge sentences war hero in error. Daughter dismantles court's ruling. Justice system faces public reckoning. Luther took one small step forward. You didn't just doubt my story, he said. You erased it. You never asked who I was. Just assumed I didn't belong. Coldwell stared at him, stunned. Delilah stood beside her father now. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just stood as tall as he did. Together. Luther turned to the courtroom. My father built that house with his hands, he said. My mother passed in that home. My name was written into the wood frame before I knew how to spell it. He looked back at the judge. You think I trespassed? He stepped back, his voice calm. But I belonged there long before your system said I didn't. The judge opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Delilah spoke again. My father came here today with no legal team. No cameras. No attention. He came to answer a charge. And you sentenced him without asking a single question about who he was. She paused. That's the problem with your bench. You've stopped listening. But we haven't. The courtroom was still. Luther turned to his daughter. Let's go. They walked out together. No applause. No cheers. Just silence. The kind of silence that follows a storm, when everything has been laid bare. Outside, a wall of reporters waited. Mr. Grant. Congresswoman Grant. Do you have a statement? Luther paused. He looked out across the crowd. I spent my life thinking silence was survival, he said. That if I stayed quiet, the world would see me right. He shook his head. But the world doesn't see unless you make it. He looked into the cameras. Don't wait until you need a daughter in Congress to be believed. Ask questions. Learn people's names. Don't judge before you know. He turned and walked down the steps, Delilah at his side. Behind them, the courthouse doors slowly closed. And inside, Judge Raymond Coldwell remained at the bench, staring at a folder that told the truth louder than his gavels ever could. Luther Grant didn't win that day because he shouted. He won because he stood. And in that stillness, he reminded everyone what justice truly looks like when it finally opens its eyes.